Apologies, sincere apologies for the slight delay. We are still working through this technology, and there's a couple little things that we still got to get through. So, for those who are kind enough to invest some time with us, welcome to our broadcast about emotional intelligence. We've got a panel here from various backgrounds and professions and experiences who are going to share a few things about their exposures to emotional intelligence, some of the benefits, some of the detriments, and share some, ideally, some great stories. Speaking of stories, as we get started, I wanted to share a little anecdote that I heard that I think aptly kind of summates how we can ease into this. There were four men on a boat, and on one end of the boat had this hole. And so the two guys on the far end of the boat with the hole had some buckets, and they were trying to get the water out, right? Feverishly working to get that water out. Meanwhile, the other guys at the other end of the boat staring at them and look at each other, and one says to the other, "Man, I'm glad I'm not on their side of the boat." As silly as that anecdote is, I think part of what we're going to be discussing here is just the same kind of impacts of emotional intelligence on our organizational boats, where sometimes we don't understand some of the things that we're saying, some of the things that we're doing, or even in some cases not doing, can impact how the organization functions. What I wanted to do for those that are on is to introduce some of the panel. Since I have two of my guests that were invited on right now. I've got Jimmy Jenkins, who is an executive with a company called Blue Halo, with the headquarters out in Alabama, but with a nation and a global wide reach. Who's also a retired colonel and was my battalion commander, Ray and I's, some years ago. An exceptional leader, and I'm really happy to have him joining us today. Enjoyed some great times with Jimmy some years ago. I also have Jerry Jacobitz, retired Command Sergeant Major, also working for the city of El Paso for Veterans Affairs. Good friend and longtime ally. And I welcome you, and I again thank you for joining us, and for investing. I say that word very deliberately, investing time with us to share some experiences on emotional intelligence. Desi, you want to introduce your guest and friend and colleague?
Yes, this is my best friend, Zoe Mead, and my colleague. And she is a network expert. So she connects people from various professions and organizations. And she and I have been collaborating on a lot of projects to um, get both of us in a position where we have more exposure to our brands and more opportunities. And right now, Zoe and I are working together on putting together a Nike youth track and field camp, and that's a big project that we have right now. But yeah, Zoe is she's been a really big help in my own business, and yeah, she's really good at what she does.
Hey, so speaking of that, what I didn't fail to do is introduce my my baby girl and daughter Desiree, who is has her own business called Cut by Cota, where she's focuses on mind and spiritual, mental fitness, more in the area of functionality and mind strength and focus. And full disclosure, she opened up her business, which inspired me to get my business off the ground. Also, an exceptional athlete, and has a degree from New Mexico State and a master's in sports psychology from JFK out there in California. As a matter, and I know that if I'm not mistaken, Zoe also has a master's or two, and is in the working world. So the thing that's really I admire about the two of them is highly intelligent, highly athletic, and continuously working on improving themselves, and far ahead of where I was when I was that age in terms of just pursuing my education and really focus. So I appreciate everyone being here. Um, as we were looking, I sent this out to you. If you look at emotional intelligence, and one of the things you might ask yourself, and I kind of put this in the agenda, some might ask, well, why in the world would we focus on something like emotional intelligence when we have things like artificial intelligence that are developing at rapid pace, and we have some of the global challenges that are happening across the globe. And while those are certainly important, I think one of the things that Desiree and I thought about was, every single day in whatever you do, people work hard to try to master their crafts, their technical skills, their technical acumen, what they do, whether it be finance or whether it be in engineering. So we are continuously honing those processes so that what we do is better. So how we perform is better. But one of the things that we don't necessarily put as much emphasis on is emotional intelligence. And developing that at the same level and same rate on parallel paths of ascension as we do our technical skills. And as you start, and this panel will tell you, especially those that are more senior than I, in terms of the what they've done and where they've served, they'll tell you that the higher up you go, it's not about your intellectual capacity or your acumen. It's really about your ability to influence those around you, to have them buy into you, and then ultimately buy in your message so that you can achieve the things that you want to achieve. And oh, by the way, along the way, you're developing as you go. So within the realm of emotional intelligence, there is, typically four areas. There is self-awareness, there is social awareness, there's self-management, and social skills. In the area of self-awareness, it really falls into self-confidence, your emotional awareness. It's about understanding how you're acting and understanding how what you say is going to impact others. The social awareness is about your understanding of the environment, and how people are feeling. Self-management, which is really a tough thing for us sometimes, all of us, is we understand how we're supposed to act and what we're supposed to do, but sometimes the heat of the moment might get the better of us. And so sometimes what we know we need to do and what we actually do don't always run parallel paths, right? And so that's part of the self-control, self-management aspect that I think most of us, at least speaking for myself, still need some work on. And then the last part of that is social skills. And really it's talking about your influence, your inspirational leadership, developing others, building bonds, teamwork, and collaboration. So self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, social skills. Of those, I pose this to the panel as we head into this discussion. Of those four, of self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, social skills, is there any one of those to the group that they feel is more important than another, or perhaps one that you're probably better at than another?
I can take that first.
Okay.
I would say for me is something that I am probably really good at is empathy and empathizing. And I would say on that same note might also put me in a position where I am over empathizing, where you can empathize to a certain degree, but then to what degree is there any real resolution to the situation? Just for an example, it's just like coach to athlete, right? My athlete's not showing up to practice on time, and not being committed to what they agreed to do. And so there's a degree to where I empathize, or maybe something's going on at home, this, that, and the other. But also has to be like a balance between that relationship, empathizing, and also figuring out where the boundary is so that your athlete can do well and be held to a certain standard in order to excel. So I think empathy for me is both a strength and something that should have a balance.
That's a great point, and I think Ray and his cousin Lorenzo were having a similar conversation in text, or we're just discussing that very point where you want to be empathetic, but at some point you walk a fine line between acknowledging how they feel and enabling those feelings that are detrimental to them doing what they need to do. So you want to feel for them and you want to care about them. At the same time, at some point after the acknowledgement, there has to be some level of setting the parameters and reestablishing the standards to help them achieve, whether it's in athletics or whether it's in the office or whether it's in the field of play or the field of battle. Ultimately, there's standards that we need to achieve. Empathy is not that you don't care. You do. That's part of that process, but you don't care to the detriment of the person that you're trying to help and trying to establish those boundaries. So, walking that line between acknowledging their feelings and enabling those feelings that are detrimental to their achievement.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Frank, can you hear me? Can everybody hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Ray.
All right. Hey, so going on that, I remember a lesson learned. We both learned from Jimmy Jenkins there, is that empathy, and then you start showing favoritism to the detriment of your organization, because you feel so bad for a particular employee or soldier and you're trying to make them successful, and then maybe you cross a line or not, and are you showing favorites? Is it really helping your organization, or is it going to come back to haunt you? And I remember that was one of the lessons we learned, way back in the day. And it was, I really felt like, hey, we're empathizing with this guy. He's one of our go-to guys, but then, like your daughter said, did we empathize too much? And then you start showing favoritism or whatever.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, walking that line from a leadership standpoint. Jimmy, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was trying to go back in my memory of which one of the many case studies that apply to of the challenges that we had amongst different leaders in the organization. I'll take it on a different trail. Desiree, your empathy talk inspired me because I haven't thought about it the way you described it. I read Goldman's book many, many years ago. I got very excited, and I got excited around the social skills part of it. And so when my kids went off to college, I had each kid read a book. My two older boys went to West Point, so I had them read Once an Eagle. And my two younger kids went to regular colleges, so I had them both read Emotional Intelligence. And what I wanted to get across to them was how you relate and communicate with others is going to have a bigger impact on your ability to be successful than your IQ, which is kind of what one of his themes is. So I do want you to study, and that's exceptionally important, but I want you to work as hard on how you relate to others, how you empathize with others, how you understand, how you communicate, how you write effectively. These things will matter more in time about your success, both in personal life and I think professional life, than just getting the highest IQ test you can and only being very, very good at one thing. And so I really enjoyed that aspect, and it's kind of I kind of think through that lens. The other things are not to me as important the way Frank said, because what highlights, but you put empathy on a whole new level for me, and I appreciate it because I always had the social skill in that realm for those reasons.
Excellent. Yeah. Thanks for that. Providing a little more color on that, Jimmy. Is there so we talked a little bit about some of the things that maybe we kind of lean on, and it's very common, whether it's in sports or whether it's in intellectual capacity, where we have a strength and we'll go to it almost to our detriment. Whether it's I'm a huge boxing fan, so if you watch Deontay Wilder, if you know about heavyweight boxing, he uses his right hand and it's a powerful tool, but he was figured out by Tyson Fury, and he got beat pretty badly, right? Because he's figured out. And so we typically have a tendency to go to the things that we are really good at, and then don't develop some of the things that we probably should. So as we talked about that, is there something that to the panel, is there something that you find yourself over relying on? And if so, how do you recognize that? Because in terms of part of that is a self-awareness, like, hey, I know that I'm not in the right path. What's your process for recognizing that you're overusing one of these aspects, and how do you put yourself back on track? is there any mechanism or a tool or reminder, something you do physically or mentally that you just do through self-awareness to help you understand you're over relying on something and you pull yourself back? So,
I was just going to say, I think going to counseling, I don't, I've never been, done a whole lot in the civilian world, but in the military, I took counseling serious, and it might work for certain leaders, a certain type of personality. I know I'm an ESTJ, so I'm very judgmental. I judge. Whereas I found, when I was trying to counsel people, they didn't always react and give me the feedback that I expected, whether they took things personal or they just said things, and I was like, wow, I'm really not getting through this person because I'm relying on this. Like, I expected them to have an accurate self-assessment of their abilities and performance, just like I think I do. Like you said, what is one of your strengths? I think I'm, could I assess myself like, hey, where do you think you are in the leaders in this unit or whatever? And I thought I could give a pretty accurate one, and I expected them to do the same thing. And well, not everybody's like that. Somebody's like, hey, I'm the number one guy, even though he's probably number 15 out of 15. So I found myself in those counseling sessions trying to recalibrate and how, number one, how do you talk to people? The things, maybe even the order that you bring up things. You don't want to go in there and they feel, once you find out maybe what kind of person they are you attacking? They might feel like you're attacking them in this counseling session because you're asking them for that self-assessment right away. Hey, where do you think you fit in here? And that puts them on defensive. So it was the feedback that the feedback I would get that I would try to adjust, and all of that evolved over time in my career.
Yeah. So I hear what you're saying, Ray, is, sometimes what you're sharing doesn't have the impact that you want it to because it's taken, either you or others take it as negative. So as I think about that, and I've seen that happen before, what are some things, any thoughts on what we can do if we're going to have some intense conversations, especially about around performance? Are there some things that we can do before we have those conversations that can help mitigate some of those feelings on both sides of the conversation?
Well, I don't mean to hog up any of the stage, so I'm going to say this and get off. So Frank and Ray both know this because before every counseling session I have done since 1995, you had to fill out a form before you came to the counseling session. You had to tell me your top 3 strengths and your top 3 weaknesses. But then I ask in the military, evaluate yourself amongst your peers. But then you had to turn and you had to evaluate me. So going back to your original question, Frank, of how do you find the things that you may not see for yourself? So you had to tell me my top 3 strengths and my top 3 weaknesses. I have kept every single one of those forms since 1995. I have both of y'all's forms. Frank, I even have yours when you were a major. And I have done that in industry for 10 years now. Every single evaluation I've done, I still do that form. And it has the same effect. It catches people off guard. Oh, sir, you're perfect. You don't need, I know. BS, I'm not. Tell me the things that I can do to improve, but also tell me the things I need to sustain so I don't change them. That gets exactly after what you're saying. How do you get self-aware of the things you may not know? And so today, as an example, I brought in 2 of my very trusted sources and said, someone said that maybe someone asked another one of my peers, did she feel that I pressured her into a decision? She said, oh, no, not at all. Now, the word, the no, not at all didn't matter to me, but the fact that a senior person would even ask that question meant, did I do something that caused someone to feel that I pressured them? So I've got 2 little Napoleon corporals I've now sent out into the wild to go say, hey, is this something that I'm doing inadvertently that I don't know about? Or if I want to pressure someone, I'll let them know I'm going to pressure you into doing this. But I didn't want, it was not ever my intent. So I try to put these things in place to continue to improve, how I lead. And as I think Ray and Frank can say, I will bring up in a session, hey, someone told me that I need to work on this, and this is what I'm going to do. And one thing I loved about them is I got pretty candid advice of, sir, you screwed this thing up pretty bad. And it was fun because I got to learn from it, and I still learn from it. So that's a technique, not the best one, but I don't know how many years is that now? 28 years. I've got all those forms. I've kept every one, and I go back and look at them every now and then to say, am I still doing that same bad trade. So you're off the stage for a little bit.
No, that's pretty. So I had no idea you're keeping all those. So I want to make sure that that I, loaded up the site somewhere. This
Too
is
late. I got them.
One of the things that I also have found useful, and I'll step if someone else wants to add. Obviously, the higher you go, the more difficult this is. But typically, for NCOs, it's a little easier in the beginning. Jerry probably attests to that. As you get the opportunity to be amongst your people throughout the course of the day, throughout the course of the week, whether it's in PT, whether it's in the field, or whether it's on a deployment. And so through the course of just those interactions of assessing their training and having conversations, you kind of get an opportunity to know who they are, so that when you do have those one-on-one conversations like you were having, Ray, you will have picked up on some of their nuances in terms of how they communicate. Like, how do they act when they feel attacked? And how do they act when they feel defensive? And so you'll learn these, and I'm not a poker guy, but you play enough poker, you kind of learn people's kind of body language and cues. Are they bluffing? Are they for real? And so, one technique that I found helpful is, again, as the higher you go up, the more challenging this becomes. But typically, usually, mostly in any good organization, and I don't say this to disparage any organization, but typically you don't have any more than 6 direct reports. So that's your span of influence. So provides a great opportunity for you to get out amongst those 6 in this example, to understand who they are, what they're about, and kind of know their moves and body language and the way that they communicate, so that when you have these one-on-ones, you will have a better understanding of what that nod means, and what that shift means, and what that arm fold means, or what that tone and tenor in their voice means. Because as I shared, and something that I shared with somebody else, is that so oftentimes the way people say things and their body language speak more than anything that their words could possibly do, if you're paying attention to that. In terms of being on the ground, Jerry, did you have anything you could share on that for us, please?
Well, I think this is a great conversation, and just like Jimmy was saying, feedback's a gift. And that's all part of this whole emotional intelligence, right? And as we're talking about counseling, or what all these different conversations we're having here, it all goes back to me. It's about your self-awareness, and once you're self-aware of yourself, you can change the dynamics of any engagement that you have out there, and knowing who you're talking to, getting that feedback, like Jimmy was saying. It feels weird calling you Jimmy, sir. But anyways, still only couple.
Yes, it's Jimmy.
Yours is a diary, but not only did you demanded that, but people provided that feedback to you, and so that was that social awareness. There was that self-awareness that you were able to build, and obviously, I think most leaders. In the military usually have a pretty good self-awareness and pretty good emotional IQ, but without that, stuff just doesn't work the way that we want it to. It's not as productive, and doesn't drive the results that we want to see in our workplace. I'll leave that.
Yeah, something that you shared that I thought, and with both with Jimmy and with you, Jerry, the thing that stands out to me, and I know this analogy has been used ad nauseum, and it's almost to the point of cliche, but I think it's very relevant here, in that you've got to tell the emperor they have no clothes, right? You have to, and that bodes to something a little bit different that feeds into this, is about psychological safety, where people feel that they can share with you these thoughts and not be thought less of, or seen as an outsider, seen as adversarial, when they're telling you things that you need to hear, right? Because the old adage goes that you shoot the messenger, you stop getting messages, right? And so that's something that we never want to do. One of the questions I had, I wanted to ask you, Zoe. I don't want to pull like conversations you had when you were here with Des, but is there I feel like you have an instance of something that was suboptimal with EQ in the workplace and how that went down. If you're open to share how that went down and how that made you and others feel when this happened. Again, you can be as generic or not. If you don't want to discuss it, I'm okay with that too. But I thought some of the things you shared, I thought were so relevant to what we're discussing today.
Yes, definitely. And it's actually really interesting that we're having this conversation so directly after that happened, or that happened in proximity to this conversation. But I was on a work call, and I do a couple different things, work wise, with a couple different agencies and things. But we were in a meeting, and people start joking about things. There's that just having fun kind of feel to it. And one of the people was talking about how their kid is like driving them nuts, and so the conversation kind of builds from there. And then we start talking about people essentially not about people who haven't had kids yet or have decided not to have kids. And then it spirals into essentially it goes kind of down the segue into adoption. And one of the people on the call at the time says that when him and his wife were working with her in a family, that he had the idea of going to the orphanage essentially and having the kids do like a combine to figure out which kid would be adopted. And saying things like that on that kind of call, you don't know who's on the call, what their background is. I am adopted, and so not that he knew that while we were on the call, but not having the emotional intelligence to know your audience, or to know who you're communicating with, or the people that have a background in the things that you're discussing. And he emphasized that he was just joking, but I think that once certain things are out there, it's really hard to walk things back once certain things are said, especially when you're in a professional setting, because you can kind of just get marked as someone who said this once, or someone who was in a room, or laughed at the joke when it was said, instead of somebody who stood up and said that it was wrong. And so it's emotional intelligence, I think, especially when you're in a position of leadership and you have that platform, just being very aware of the audience that you're communicating with, and the people that they're going to be looking to you for leadership, and making sure that they're people that want to be led by you at the end of the day.
Yeah. So thanks for sharing that, Zoe. I know I remember when you were sharing with us here, it was kind of tough. Even then, it was tough for me to hear that time, and it didn't get any easier the second time around. I could see a couple of us, shaking our heads and cringing, just because we know just how highly insensitive that is. And so if we're trying to invest in people, right? If we're trying to invest in people, I would say that instead of putting something in, they took something out, right? They took something out of the bank, and that's hard to reinvest, especially when that is there. So I appreciate you sharing that with us and being so candid and forthright in that share. Is there anyone else who's had an experience on the opposite side of that, where there was a very, very, very tough situation, and instead of going that way, they displayed some strong emotional intelligence that helped mitigate what could otherwise been a very tough situation, either for a person or poor outcome for the mission or the task? I know we have.
Well, I don't know if it was that bad. So when I was at Fort Sill, I became really good friends with the Japanese LNO. His English was really not all that great, and he briefed the commandant, on a weekly basis or every other week. And I could tell a lot of the, our guys, U.S. guys, were like, "Oh, it's Colonel Abe again. No one understands what he's saying. So we're just gonna dismiss him." So I kind of took him not under my wing. He was another lieutenant colonel, but I just kind of made friends with him. We became really good friends. His wife and my wife, and I just kind of just helped him. And he would come in and he's like, "Hey, is this the right thing to say?" Because he would pick up on if he said something wrong or used the wrong term in English, because he could write really well in English. Then he wanted, so he started coming to me for some feedback before he would brief. And so I just kind of helped him out. And Whereas maybe some of the other guys are like, oh, let's just get through it. He's not saying anything important anyways, even though he was the coordinator for bringing, Japanese air defense units to Fort Bliss to do live fires. And, it was a big deal. And, so I didn't think he needed to be, dismissed like the way he was by some of the guys. So, I mean, I'm not trying to say I was a superhero, but I just try to help him out. And we're still friends to this day. So.
Yeah. So the fact that you recognize how he's feeling, and the fact that you're still friends, I think speaks well of how you were, sensing how he felt and creating that connection. I think Stephen Porter also mentioned it here in a chat about creating psychological safe environment. Well, maybe he didn't feel safe with everybody else, but he feels safe with you, and that's really important. The other thing too, when we talk about emotional intelligence, as I was looking at this. Typically, generally, usually, mostly, most business leaders today, right, wrong, or indifferent, are very transactionally focused, right? What am I going to do now is going to make me money or benefit me tomorrow, or even near term, short term, even in the quarter. So even though I'm not a fan of the transactional leadership, if one is so inclined to think in that way, transactional leadership or transactionally, EQ can benefit people. There are studies in a recent article in a business journal that indicates that people with strong emotional intelligence typically earn between $29,000 to $38,000 more a year than those without. There's also data that indicates that 90% of executives in senior roles and CEOs have higher levels of emotional intelligence than those that have higher emotional intelligence, and because of that, they're in a greater position. And there's also some data that talks about that organizations with higher EQ in their cultures outperform those without in terms of the metrics and the revenue generations or sales or productivity, whatever metric we want to measure. So if a leader was so inclined to look at this strictly from a transactional standpoint, then there's benefit to engaging this. If you're like most of us here and we're playing the long game, so to speak, it's more transformational. And transformational is just how in the long term we're impacted by the people who invested, and I say that for the fourth or fifth time, invested their time and their efforts and their care in us because they believed enough in us to know that we were capable of more, and they invested that time because of their intellect and leadership and emotional intelligence in us to help us be better, to help us feel better, to help us feel like we're more a part of something. And we're not just numbers, or not just a name on a roster. We're real, actual people. And so part of that emotional intelligence, and I feel like that falls into the social skills area of influence, where it falls into inspirational leadership. I think a lot of us have read through some John Maxwell, and certainly my first introduction to that was, when Jimmy introduced that book to us all those years ago. I've read about 15 or 20 of his books, Jimmy, since that time. And one of my favorite sayings from John Maxwell is, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, right? And so I feel like that emotional intelligence, in that awareness and inspiring and developing others and building bonds, I feel in terms of mission and in terms of accomplishing, turn a have to into a want to. And I think, in my humble opinion, is the difference between, good organizations and great organizations, where you have leaders who invest enough time in people on trying to get them to be their best selves, and their organizations to be their best selves. So it's a very transformational process. And if we talk about this strictly in developing and building bonds, so I'm looking, and I know we're a very small panel, but just look at the length and the duration of time that we've known each other, when we met. And even though we have no, realistically, especially for those that are military, former military, there's no reason that we need to stay connected per se, right? But after all these years, we're still connected because there was a bond that was created all those years ago. Even with Jimmy and Ray, and then with Jerry and I all those years ago serving in 11th Brigade. And then my fondest memory when Desi and Zoe were little, they used to play against each other in playing basketball in the summer leagues, right? And they were both super focused and super intense, and they didn't know each other at all at that time, but they had the same type of personalities. They were very driven, they were very athletic, they very much wanted to win. And you could tell on the look on the faces if you looked at either one of them who was winning and who was losing. Although sometimes let me walk that back. They were so intense. Sometimes you couldn't tell who was winning and who was losing, and that was before they knew each other. And of course, as they grew up and started working with one another, and then certainly became teammates at New Mexico State. They haven't competed at New Mexico State for many years, and yet they're still connected, right? So they still remain friends. There's that bond that I feel is part of that social skills. So as soldiers, we're still connected, even though there's no obligation to do so. And with Des and Zoe, there's that connection of building bonds. And so I think that's one of the, if there's anything that I feel is important with this process of emotional intelligence, it's not just what we're able to accomplish. I feel that these relationships that we've built and continue to build on are so valuable. I have, and I just look at this small panel, and I see people that were leaders and now my friends and became my brothers now. So that's something that's really very emotional for me, and it makes me feel very good to know that long beyond any gunnery tables we have connections, long beyond any competitions and pushing each other on the field or in the pit. They're still pushing each other and still connecting with one another, challenging each other intellectually and professionally. I think that's part of the emotional intelligence of my favorite part is the building of bonds that are a derivative of those investments.
I wanted to add something to that just by saying the transitional or the
Transformational?
Transformational part of those relationships too is just how you evolve together because you're experiencing something so similar, and because you can relate to that person in such a strong way that it helps you form. Zoe and I would stay at the track for 4 hours every single day, and then we would travel together and we lived together aside from like having all the same classes together. But just like you were saying, the part of it that really benefits us is making those connections, because we gravitate to people so much and we want to form those connections. So yeah, I really value what you said. Just the more in tune you are with the ability to connect with people in these ways socially, have that self-awareness to do it, the stronger your relationships are as a result, right? It's the same thing, like anything that you want to receive in the world and you want to reflect back at you, that's what we have to present as, right? So just wanted to also say that it's just the strength of the bonds because of the level of self-awareness.
One thing I would also say is that it's because you're emotionally intelligent that you want to have those bonds, right? I mean, everybody wants to be on, like what Zoe was saying when she's talking about the adoption and the combines. And I kind of have to explain myself, because if we're going to relook this, you're going to see me kind of laughing. And that's because I was adopted. I'm part of 6 kids in my family was adopted. And if they would have held a combine, I would have never been adopted. So, and people have done PT with me. They know that I'm just good enough, right? But not a superstar. So I appreciate that. But when we talk about transformational leadership, right? I love this subject, and I'm really passionate about it because it is all about emotional intelligence, right? And the key that I always like to talk about when I talk about transformational leadership is that allows you to be a leader that is now a thermostat, not a thermometer, right? So the thermometer, you can read the temperature, right? But the thermostat, you control that temperature. And so the biggest problems we see in organizations, both military, the city governments, or any kind of government, and then outside the business world, I've never really worked in the business world for a long time. But in case studies and what I've read is the inability for us to be able to change the climate. And that's what great leaders have to do. And you can misstep a lot. You can say some things that out there that then erode at the trust factor. And once you erode trust, that is super hard to get back, right? No matter what that person's intent was, you got to be, very careful and be very aware of everybody that's in the room and what you're saying and how that impacts them. I'm gonna step off the soapbox now.
Oh, thanks for sharing that, Jerry. I think that validates a lot of what we were talking about, and certainly, um, I don't want to laugh too hard about. You said if there was a combine, you wouldn't get. I mean, but listen, you're always going to be my number one draft pick, brother. So I got you, man. uh, so as we still have some time, and I wanted to see if there was take some questions from. I know we've got a few listeners out there and people that are watching. So if there's anybody that is watching, we certainly welcome the opportunity at this time to take some questions that you may have of the panel. And if they don't, I certainly have a couple that I'd like to ask, but I'll leave that out there. See if there's anybody out there want to post a question in the comments section. We certainly welcome that opportunity to do so. And so while we're doing that and waiting for some comments, if we get some, one of the things that I wanted to share in the realm of emotional intelligence about self-management, and as I shared, I struggled a little bit with this, throughout my career. I get better every day, but certainly got a long way to go. But I'll never forget many, many years ago when it was called the instructor trainer course, small group leader course, and I was going to be instructor. I had to go through that. It's like 3-week course, and a couple of us got a little bit flustered because one of the things that they did as they're evaluating you, they put in some ringers in the audience to kind of fluster you, to see how you're going to react if somebody asks you a tough question or if somebody starts to act kind of like a jerk a little bit. Obviously, in the military, you're not going to go too crazy, even in the best environment. But people will do some things that are going to throw you off. And so when the instructor saw that some of us were having some challenges with that, he says, "Look, guys, let me tell you something right now. Here's something that you can use no matter what you're doing, whether it's in this or whether it's dealing with a test situation. Things go south, or someone asks you a tough question, or somebody says something that makes you angry, do this. Stop." He said, pause, think, and respond. Pause, think, and respond. Pause to allow the emotion to go through you, right? So that you don't react, right? Think about what you want to say, or think about the answer that you want to provide, and think about the impact that you want your statement to have. You've got to kind of do like a time machine thing in your head where you think about what you want the outcomes to be, and is what you're going to say going to get you there, or is it just going to dig a hole? So pause, give time for the emotion to go. Think about what you want to say, the impact you want to have, and then respond in a way that reflects your best self. And even if that response is, "That's a great question, I don't have an answer for you right now. Let me do some research on that." Maybe in your mind, like, "You sorry son of a whatever," and you're very angry. That's your internal voice, and that's great. But if you can't, as the old saying goes, you can't say something nice, don't say something at all, right? One of the other tools that I share with others in this day and age is, everybody wants to go viral, but there's always somebody that goes viral for the wrong reasons. They say or do something in the heat of the moment that somebody has their phone out and they memorialize it now and forever. Now and forever, you're known as the person that screamed at a dog or jerked a leash or flipped somebody off, or it was an old lady that cut you off and you didn't know it was an old lady, but you flipped her off anyway. Whatever the case may be, someone got that on video. Now and forever, that's your viral moment. One or 2 seconds of indiscretion are now defining you to the rest of the world, right? So in this day and age, when I talk to the younger leaders and younger people, I say, well, if that moment went viral, how would you feel? Would that represent you? Like, just imagine someone's got a camera on you, and how would you react if this was something that the world was going to see, right? So pause, think, respond is a tool that I learned. I after all these decades, haven't quite mastered it yet. I'm still like from 10, 20 level, if we're talking Army standards, maybe up at the 20 level, trying to get to the 30 level, but still working on it. Seeger, Joseph Brinker had a couple comments here. What did Joe say? He said, he didn't have any comments. We want to thank us for mentorship and leadership. Both had an immediate impact on me. Joe rocks, by the way. Joe's a good guy. He was our XO back in the day. He also, my daughter, who's a teacher now, my oldest daughter, Joe did some math tutoring with her when she was struggling with some math because I knew I wasn't going to do it. My wife and I were like, okay, who can help? I said, I think I know a smart guy. I know a real smart fella. So we got Joe to help me out. So I'm thankful to him. And Seagram talked about, we're familiar with what we did in the past doesn't mean it's right today. How important is it for leaders to change? So he says, because we're familiar with what we did in the past doesn't mean it's always right. How important is it for leaders to change? So that's a question of the panel. How important is it for leaders to change?
Well, I can start this one off. I think that having self reflection and being able to identify that things you did in the past weren't correct and being in tune with the ways that you best want to move forward. And I think it's interesting that the first comment was about mentorship, because I think that having a mentor and someone to kind of help you with that accountability, but also help you navigate, okay, this is what happened. I understand that, I should have navigated that differently. What's the best way to navigate this moving forward, while being also in a leadership role, really allows for people to, have that space to grow and make those changes. But I think that as leaders, having your team or your people know that, hey, I'm not perfect, and I'm open to changing, and I'm open to, knowing where I went wrong and the places that I can do better, is really what's going to help an organization thrive. Is when, and we've kind of touched on that throughout the panel, different people have brought that up, but I think having that in leadership, having the ability to change as a leader, will really be a huge contributing factor in the success of your leadership.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Zoe. Looking to change. I think one of the things too that I like Seagram to maybe as an evolution. Maybe it's an evolution. I went through a project management course some months ago. It's agile project management. In essence, it's developing something to give to the customer while you're developing something better for the future. So the difference between agile project management and waterfall project management is waterfall is like a house or a car. You don't get a product until it's done. But agile is used for software, and you're always getting these upgrades, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. And so you give the customer something, and then you're developing something new so that you can improve their way of life. And the cool example I thought in this project management thing that relates to this is, if you want a car, you may not be able to build a car straight away, but you give them some skates, and you give the customer skates because you can do that quickly. And while they're on their skates, you're developing a skateboard, and then you deliver that. And while they have the skateboard, you're building and delivering a bike, and then you give them that. And then you work on a motorcycle while they have the bike, and then you give them that. And then you have a car. So in every phase of agile, you're providing something that they can use to transport themselves. It may not be optimal in the beginning, but it's an evolution of progression that each product is better than the one before it. And so if I use that analogy of agile, I feel like I want to be, maybe I'm skates now, but I aspire to be a Maserati. And so I think with that, Seagram, I think maybe change is the right word, or maybe it's an evolution, right? We're not skates, but maybe we're going to be a Ram TRX, or we're going to be a Raptor F-150, or a car of choice, whatever we aspire to be. But it's a process and an evolution.
I think to add to that too, it's just the analysis part of it. Sorry, Ray, were you going to say something?
Nope. I was. Go ahead, Desi. I'll go after you.
No, go for it.
One of the things that I had to learn when I had the very fortunate chance to be a brigade commander is one of my semi-mentors, also chewed my butt often, a guy named General Mike Vane, came to my house the night before I took command. And he asked me a question that still resonates today. And so, I had a great time as battalion commander. I thought, I don't know how to get any better than this. And I would say battalion commander is a style called direct leadership style. So you're focused inside the unit, making sure the unit is the best they can be. And he said, Jimmy, how many people outrank you in the Army of 540,000 people? I said, I don't know. Probably a lot. He says, no, 375 people outrank you. You're it. They don't have time to tell you what to do. Go figure it out. And you need to change your leadership style from a direct leadership style to an indirect leadership style. And I said, okay, what the heck does that mean? And it basically means that you can't focus inside the unit at this next level of leadership. You have to focus outside the unit to go gather resources for your leaders to go do the things they need to do. And I have found that in industry, that same model applies at a certain level where you want to impact the people around you. You want to set the right climate and culture. You want to be able to listen and modify what you do. But as importantly now, I have a task to go find the resources for my leaders and my organizations to do the things they need to provide capability to the warfighter, which is what we do. So it's kind of an answer to your question a little bit, Seagram, of the change required. And I know, and it's kind of, Aaron had a good little tag on about these generational pieces. In my organization now, I've got I actually got 18-year-olds to 65-year-olds. And you don't have that as much in a military unit. So I've got all these different generational folks that you get to communicate and motivate, and they are all different, just like people are. And I'll wait for other comments to chime on that, but I wanted to kind of go to the little talk on indirect versus direct leadership.
Yeah, indirect versus direct. That's a great add, Jimmy. Thanks for sharing that with us. And then I know it probably doesn't answer your question altogether, Seager, but I think a combination of indirect and direct, and maybe some evolution. I think we're all works in process. I know that Lorenzo had asked also about, is there an instance where EQ or lack thereof impacted learning outcomes in an education or training environment? So was there any time where you were doing some instruction where a lack of EQ negatively impacted what you were trying to get to happen, any outcomes, or whether it be with kids on the track or in the training or deployment or in the offices, anything that you can share where you had to do some training and where good EQ or lack of it either positively impacted or negatively impacted?
Yeah, I got an example of that, and it's always hard to kind of look at yourself and say, hey, I messed up and I wasn't the kind of leader that I should have been. But in the early 2000s, I was an instructor at one of our primary leadership academies here in Fort Bliss. And, the first cycle I was doing, I was in it. I just was not getting the connection with the students that I wanted to have. But it was my fault because in my mind, I was the best thing since sliced bread, right? And nobody knew anything better than me. I had all the answers. And the main reason was my platoon sergeant was a guy named Sergeant First Class Frank Cota. And so before that, he beat me up all the time to make sure I knew everything. So I knew that going into that instructor course, that instructor training, that I was just the best. And so I was not listening to feedback, and I did not have emotional intelligence. And quite frankly, it caused a lot of problems between me and the students that I had, the general GPA, and then of that first class. But then after, that's why I always said that feedback is a gift, and I just love feedback. Right? It's hard sometimes too, but at the end of the course, we did an AR, and I was kind of through the AR, I was kind of getting a little angry because they were all saying how I didn't want to listen and I was not just not being a very perceptive leader. And my battle buddy, the other trainer there, turned to me and they're like, you know what? They're absolutely right. And I should have told you this like at the beginning. So that's kind of one example of where emotional intelligence had a negative impact on the training.
So it sounds like what you're saying, Jerry, is in this particular instance that maybe that you weren't open to creating the feedback loop necessary to make those adjustments like we do in the after actions review.
That was. The problem at the beginning was I was just kind of, You know how it was when you're young. You thought you knew everything, right?
Yeah. So for Des and for Zoe, a common tool in military and certainly in the Army, it's called an after actions review, and it's an improvement tool whereby if you've conducted a training exercise or a gunnery table, and immediately after it's done, as soon as you can stand down, you bring in the organization and you talk about what went well, what didn't go well, what you're going to do better, and you identify typically 3 up and 3 down because you got limited time, and then you immediately go right back out to it and do it again so that you can improve, much like you did track and field where you did a flight that you didn't like or a lap you didn't care for, some iteration. You go back, figure out what you did wrong, and then go back and fix it. So it's an after actions review where you try to get better the next time around. It's a continuous loop of improvement that you're always working on, ideally in an ideal environment. So so just wanted to kind of clarify for the two of you in case you weren't familiar with AAR, after actions review.
I do want to add something to that too. I mean, just part of this entire conversation, right? We're all talking about having the awareness to be open to people's constructive criticism, right? But even that takes difficult conversations and the right questions. So yeah, I think that the large part of this is just communicating effectively to, like you were saying, to know when things need to change, but also within you are giving that to all the people that you're serving, really effective ways of communicating so that you all can have those conversations. I think that is a huge part of this as well. I just wanted to add that.
Hey, Des. So thanks for sharing that. And something that's interesting, and it just for those listening, you are your father's daughter, because one of the things that you said was when you're serving others, and I thought that was, and I keyed up on that word because it's one that's seldom used when we're talking about either teaching others or leading others, serving. So I like your word selection.
Thank you.
Just a note. Is there anyone else, even within the panel, since we don't have a lot of questions coming in?
Well, there was one here that I just put up. This one is a new one.
Okay. Emotional intelligence is difficult with new generations. Oh, I think Jimmy did answer a little bit of this. He says emotional intelligence is difficult with new generations of thinking. I work with a lot of kids, high school kids. It's not the same as junior soldiers. Any suggestions? I'm trying to build an A team. So he's working in an environment where his workforce is very young. What are some EQ points that this leader who kind of comes from our soldier school of thought and background in the civilian sector, how can he engage some EQ with a very young workforce?
If I can answer from the reverse, as being someone who's on the younger side, who's had good management and good relationships with leaders who have come in. One thing that really stood out to me in a time when I was really kind of struggling to make bonds in the work field is my manager or my leader at the time. She took a lot of time to study her people. So it wasn't like we were just there, like, oh, you're here today or this is your schedule. She knew, like, I don't drink coffee, but she would bring coffees to the branch, and instead of bringing me a coffee, she would bring me like a croissant. And so having that buy-in where it's like, oh, this person really goes out of their way to know what I like and to identify as somebody that cares about me outside of me just being their employee, really got me to buy into her rather than just buying into the business and want to work that much harder to make sure that she was successful.
Yeah. So Zoe, I'm going to tell you, it took me about 20 years to figure out what you just shared with me right there. That's really some really good talking points to Erin. The things that I listened is that she knew her people well, which is a fundamental tenet of leadership. That she brought coffee, and it's a fundamental to break bread with your people. It's common for people to connect over breaking bread, whether it's coffee or chocolate or whatever the case may be. And then that she worked to communicate with you and connect with you, establish rapport and trust. And the thing that really resonated with that you said, Joey, with me is she wanted you to trust the messenger before delivering the message. So really good point. So a couple of things that we've talked on a couple of things. I know we're closing in at the end of our time here. We just got a little bit of time, and I know that our panel has got things going on. So I want to kind of start to wrap things up here. But I wanted to just really give my most sincere thanks to everyone who joined here on the panel, for those that got to watch with us. This was really, I know for us, a labor of love, right? Because, Desiree and I talk about these types of things all the time. Even though we're in different industries, there's a lot of things that are the same. And of course, our DNA overlap, has some connectivity there. Or else there's some similar thinking that we have. So I am so grateful to everybody for being part of this panel, for investing time with us, for taking time out of your busy schedule. I sincerely mean that, and I really value everything that you did for us today, and I value all of the investment and connection that you made with me in my past, for myself and for my family. I'm grateful. Really, I feel so happy and to know all of you, to still be connected with you after all these years, to know that if I need something, you'll take care of me, and vice versa. You got to know that from me as well. So after all these years, to have these relationships, the takeaway for me beyond charts, and I'm going to say this for the 10th time, is the building these bonds, and the fact that we still have these bonds means so much to me, more so than probably anything else that we've discussed here. Des, I don't know if you wanted to share something as we close out here.
I just the same. I just wanted to express my gratitude to everyone for being here. Their investment in time is just something that you can't get back. So we really appreciate you all investing time and sharing the space with us. So thank you very, very much.
Can I add one final comment?
Yes, sir.
So here is Ray Solis in December 2003.
Ray, you got an F.
Here's Ray Solis in December of 2004.
Another F, Ray.
And here is Ray Solis 6 years later as a Battalion S3 and 4.5 And it's funny, I was reading through our comments from his strengths and weaknesses, and it was good to kind of remember what he told me I needed to sustain and improve. Just wanted to show you the evidence.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And Ray, I'm sorry that you went from an F to an F- in 3 consecutive iterations.
Well, there's that quote from Remember the Titans that says attitude reflects leadership. So if I'm failing, there's no such thing as a bad soldier, just bad leaders is what I was always told.
Exactly.
That's right. Pawn it off on Jimmy.
You guys were a superstar team. And what you did my last few months in the command changed the world for a lot of soldiers. But you know what it was, and still doing it today. God bless you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm so humbled by your presence and by your participation today. And I look forward to talking to y'all soon and having a beer with every single one of you soon around. Des, I'm going to bring a beer upstairs right now. So,
right.
Desi's visiting us here in North Dallas, so I'm happy to have her. Hey, thank you all so much for your time. It's been wonderful talking to all of you again. Everybody who joined us online, thank you so much. Lorenzo, Lombardo, Porter, Brinker, LinkedIn user, anonymous. You suck. I suck again. All right, I got it. I'll take that. All right, guys. Thanks so much for your time. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you. I look forward to speaking with you all soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.